Left of the box. We still have time before our next election, so potentially we could do something here in Canada to avert the direction we're going. I've shown a few videos from Frank Dominic, and I get the feeling he leans far more towards the center than I do. And here he has this brilliant idea, and I don't necessarily disagree with this should happen. But I will acknowledge that it flat out will not ever happen. And I'll get into why. But first, let's see this video from him. Frank Dominic, I do not think that the Liberal, NDP, and Green parties in Canada are going to learn the right lessons from last night's election.
After last night's election, we're going to see the Liberal and NDP parties across Canada make a shift to the right. And I'm going to tell you right now that is a losing strategy. Because Republicans always vote Republican. Kamala did everything in her power to try to court the Republican vote. To find those moderate Republicans who were reasonable and who could understand that Trump was bad and say, come here, let's make a big tent party. It didn't work. Republicans will always vote Republican and conservatives will always vote conservative. In Canada and Ontario, there's a baseline of the population that is roughly between 30 and 35% that will always vote for the federal conservatives and the provincial conservatives, at least in Ontario. And so the path to victory is not to court those votes. The path to victory is to court the people who flip between blue and red, blue and orange, etc. And also it's...
I disagree with that. It's usually people who flip between blue and red to begin with. And again, up here for Americans watching, blue is conservative, red is liberal. It's backwards. And people will more often flip between the conservatives and the liberals than there will be flips between the liberals and the NDP. That's not even necessarily the people we need to be courting. The people we need to be courting are the people who don't come out to vote. The non-voters. That's the biggest base of people that, they have the biggest influence on the elections in a way. And you need to get out the non-voters. You need to find ways to energize them, to get them out. It's not about the people who flip, who regularly come out to vote. It's about all the people who don't feel there's a reason or a need or any point to voting.
To make sure that there's no vote split between the red and the orange voters. For example, in the upcoming Nova Scotia election, this is the projected popular vote. You would think that the Liberals and NDP would get an even amount of seats, and that the Conservatives would get about half. In reality, the Liberals would get about 10% of the seats. The Conservatives would get about 70% of the seats. This is what happens in a country like Canada where we have multiple parties that span the left to the center.
That's first past post to you. You can have a majority in the House and have 100% of the power with 40% of the popular vote.
The vote gets split because you're always going to get at least that 30% of the population voting for the Conservatives. And then when you're playing in the margins and the rest of the population is split between the other parties, even if you have 20-30% of the vote, you're not going to get 20-30% of the seats. The message that progressive parties in Canada need to take from this election is 1, stand for something.
There was a bit of a problem with what you just said there with progressive parties in Canada. There are none currently.
Big, audacious goals. Make claims. Things that are based in reality, but big projects that we can actually believe in. And 2, work together. Work together. Stop fighting each other. Because when you fight each other, people see you squabbling and say, well, I might as well vote for that guy.
So here's where we get into some of the other issues. Yes, vote splitting is a thing, and I've said it, and this would work. Whereas if you have, you pick the ridings and you look at, okay, do the Liberals or the NDP have a better chance of winning this one particular riding? And then the other party opts to not run a candidate in it, so you stop the vote splitting. But the thing is, that will never happen because it's not so much that the NDP and the Liberals are fighting all the time. It's that the Liberals and Conservatives are agreeing all the time. Case in point, recently from the Ontario NDP, breaking Conservatives and Liberals vote no to Homes Ontario, the largest home building program in the province's history. Now, it doesn't matter. It didn't affect the vote that the Liberals voted no with this because they don't even have party status in Queen's Park right now in Ontario. but it's the principle of the thing. At a time when we should be building more homes, we're building less. So that was the conservatives and the liberals voting together. Back when Doug Ford initially got elected, the liberals realized that they were about to completely and utterly lose. So what do? They go and campaign for Doug Ford. Not the NDP. They don't support the NDP. They supported the conservatives. And so we would run into this problem here in Canada that if the NDP pulled off a miracle and could somehow get it so that they were in a minority leadership position, so they just need the liberals to prop them up, kind of like what it is now, but with the liberals and the NDP, the liberals would actually then most likely prop up the conservatives so that the conservatives, even with fewer seats than the NDP, would then be the ruling party in the House. That's what would happen. The conservatives and the liberals would work together to keep the NDP out of power. So if the NDP ever wins an election, they need to have a majority if they want to get anything done. Otherwise, the conservatives and the liberals will work together, and one of the things they will almost immediately do is have a vote of no confidence and call for another election. The liberals will absolutely never help the NDP get into power, even in a single riding. But they would help a conservative. And the amount of crossover between candidates from the liberals and the conservatives, kind of telling.